I couldn't stop looking at my phone as I waited in the lobby, staring at the unread message from my mom. She'd been less than enthusiastic about me graduating today. Hell, she'd barely acknowledged I was finishing. I needed to know if they were even going to show up. "You still on for the ceremony?" I sent it, fingers tight with the usual mix of hope and dread. A moment later, her reply buzzed through. "Be sure you don't embarrass yourself. Let us know when it's done." My stomach tightened. Was that it? That's all I got? I stared at the screen for a moment longer, willing something warmer to pop up, but it didn't. The last time I'd tried to talk to her about my career choice, she'd sneered at the idea of me becoming a chef. "Just cooking," she called it, not even worthy of a conversation. And now, here I was, with a degree from a top culinary program, ready to walk across a stage, and my family couldn't even offer the smallest bit of support. My mind raced back to all the years I spent fighting for this path. The endless hours in kitchens, the sacrifices, the constant feeling of not being good enough to them, not meeting their expectations. They never got it. They still didn't. I closed the message thread and put my phone back in my bag. I should have known better than to expect anything different. The ceremony was just about to start, so I made my way to my seat, adjusting my cap and gown. The chatter around me was alive with excitement. Parents hugging their kids, families congratulating their graduates. I stood there on the edge of the crowd, trying to push back the lump in my throat, but it kept growing. I wanted to imagine a world where my mom, dad, and brother were there, cheering me on, where they were proud of what I'd accomplished, where they saw what I was capable of, not just the career they still thought was beneath them. But I couldn't help but know that today, just like every other day, I was still invisible to them. When they called my name, I stood up, trying to keep my emotions in check. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way to the stage. As I walked, I looked for my family. There they were, sitting together, but no one was even looking at me. My mom's eyes were glued to her phone, scrolling. Ethan, my brother, was texting. I felt the heat of embarrassment wash over me as I crossed the stage. The applause from the crowd around me nearly drowned out by the pounding in my ears. At that moment, I realized the truth. They didn't care. They weren't proud of me, and I was alone. Again, I took my diploma, feeling the weight of it, but also the sting of the moment. The applause was a blur, just a noise, really. As I walked off the stage, I looked one last time at my family. Still nothing. Mom's head was down, her face lit by the glow of her phone screen. Ethan's thumb flicked across his screen, his face tight with concentration. Not a glance, not a single acknowledgement. My chest burned. The heat of humiliation was sharp now, sharper than anything else. I joined them outside after the ceremony, trying to smile, trying to pretend like it was just another day. My cap felt heavy, my gown too hot, and I couldn't get rid of the awful, empty feeling inside. "Ready to go?" Mom asked without looking at me. Yeah," I said, swallowing back the bitterness. "So, you guys are good? The ceremony? Everything?" Mom waved me off. "Well, it's nice and all, but I still don't get why you wasted so much time with food. You could have done something with more, potential." "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to let her words stick. "Because cooking doesn't have potential." Mom glanced up at me then, barely meeting my eyes. "It's just food, Sam. You've spent 4 years for what? To cook people's meals? Really? Look at your brother. He's got a real career." She motioned to Ethan, who was still typing away on his phone, completely checked out of the moment. Ethan finally glanced up, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Yeah, Mom's right. Food's great and all, but I'm making decisions that, matter. I'm in finance. People rely on me to handle huge amounts of money. Not to mention the pay, which, well, that's not exactly something you'll be bragging about, huh?" I could feel the sting in my chest, that familiar burn of anger mixed with a heavy sinking disappointment. They'd never get it. I wanted to shout, to scream at them for being so dismissive, for not even seeing the skill and effort it took to get where I was. I'd fought for this, fought for my place in this world, and they were acting like it was nothing, like I was nothing. But what was the point? "I get it," I said, trying not to choke on the words. "You've got it all figured out, huh? Finance, important stuff." My voice was too sharp, too full of sarcasm. Ethan chuckled. "Hey, at least I'm making a real difference. People trust me with their money, Sam." I could feel my heart rate spike. "Yeah? Well, people trust me with their food, Ethan. The meals I make, the ones I spend hours perfecting, that's real too. People eat because they have to. It's not just about the food, it's about the experience. About making something that matters. He snorted, shaking his head. Right, sure, it's important to people who can't cook for themselves. But come on, Sam. You know deep down, finance is where the real stakes are. This cooking thing? It's just a hobby. A hobby. That word was enough to shatter any illusion I had left about today being something different. Ethan's words were nothing new, but hearing them on this day, my day, made it feel like a punch in the gut. Mom turned to me, checking her watch. We'll get some food, I guess. A celebration. But don't expect much, Sam. This is really about Ethan's promotion, not about whatever you're doing. It was like a slap, even though I knew it was coming. I tried to hold on to some shred of hope that maybe today, just today, they'd recognize me. But that hope was quickly fading, like a balloon losing air. Right, I said, my voice low. Of course. They didn't even notice the hurt in my tone. They never did. As I stood there, waiting for them to finish packing up their things, I realized something. My desire to capture the day, to feel like a real graduate, like someone who mattered to the people who should have been my biggest supporters, was slipping away. The celebratory atmosphere that filled the air around me seemed so far away, like something I'd never reach. My family didn't get it, and they never would. I didn't know if I was angry or just tired. Probably both. At that moment, all I wanted was to be somewhere else, to not feel like I was invisible, standing on the edge of a family that barely noticed I existed. I stood there for a few more seconds, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this day. It was supposed to be my day, right? I'd worked my ass off for this moment, but now it felt like an afterthought to them. So, I said, forcing some optimism into my voice, are we celebrating my graduation tonight? Maybe go out for a nice dinner? Mom glanced at me like I was asking for something absurd. Oh, we're going out to eat, sure. But it's really more for Ethan. You know, now that he's been promoted and all. Ethan looked up from his phone, half smiling. Yeah, promotion's a big deal. Might as well celebrate that, right? Of course. Ethan's promotion was always the thing that mattered. That was the big deal. My graduation? A nice little add-on to whatever Ethan was doing. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. So I just nodded, my mouth dry. It's just a nice addition to the day, Mom continued, dismissing me with a flick of her hand. You know how it is. We've got to focus on the big stuff. Big stuff? Sure, that's how they saw it. I felt the last bit of the day's excitement drain out of me. What was the point of holding on to this hope that they'd ever understand? We stood around awkwardly for a moment before I tried to salvage a little piece of the day, even if it meant grasping at straws. Hey, can we at least get a few pictures, just to mark the occasion? Mom sighed, but she gave in. Fine. But let's make it quick, Sam. We've got to get going soon. I pulled my gown into place and adjusted my cap, trying to ignore the way she was already looking at her watch. She fiddled with her phone, snapping a few pictures without much care. Each shot felt like I was the one forcing it, not them. I tried to smile, but the weight of everything was too much, and the smiles felt hollow. Ethan shifted his stance, barely paying attention. These photos are for you, Sam? Or for, like, a future resume? Mom muttered something under her breath, like a joke that wasn't funny, before snapping another picture. I stared at the ground for a second, breathing deeply. I couldn't hold on to the anger. Not now. Not when I was trying to make something out of this pathetic attempt at a celebration. I cleared my throat, trying to steer the conversation somewhere else. You know, it's not just about the cooking, I said, trying to make them see what it really meant to me. There's a lot that goes into being a chef. It's more than just food. It's about the craft, the precision. It's like creating something people remember, something they love. Mom's eyes shifted from her phone back to me, like she was really listening for the first time today. But then she shook her head, cutting me off before I could even finish. It's just cooking, Sam. You're not saving lives. It's not something that's going to set you up for a future, you know? The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I didn't know how much longer I could pretend that this wasn't breaking me. The sharpness in her voice, the way she just dismissed everything I had worked for, every late night and every sacrifice, it made everything feel so small, so insignificant. I swallowed hard, trying to push the hurt down. I know it's not saving lives, Mom, but it's meaningful. It matters to me. She didn't respond. Instead, she went back to scrolling through her phone like the whole thing didn't even matter. Like I didn't matter. Ethan stretched his arms over his head, yawning. Okay, let's wrap this up. I've got some things to do later, and we still need to celebrate my promotion, remember? I glanced at him, his smug grin only making me feel more like an outsider. My whole life, that's what it had been. Ethan, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, and me, standing here in my cap and gown, watching them celebrate his career while mine barely got a passing glance. I forced a smile, but it was shaky. Yeah, sure. I turned away, wishing I could just disappear for a moment. They didn't get it. They wouldn't. And no amount of photos, no amount of effort on my part was ever going to change that. We made our way to the restaurant, but the whole ride there felt like one long, drawn-out pause. There wasn't much conversation. Ethan had gone back to his phone, Mom kept checking her watch, and I was left staring out the window, feeling like I was outside looking in. When we finally sat down at the table, Mom picked up the menu like she had all the time in the world. I tried to shake off the sense of being out of place, but it stuck to me like glue. So, I said, trying to make something of the moment, do you guys even realize how much work goes into becoming a chef? Like, it's not just about the food. It's an entire lifestyle, you know? The hours are brutal, and there's so much to learn. It's not just about following recipes. There's the creativity, the precision, the leadership. It's a full-on career. Mom barely looked up from the menu. It's just cooking, Sam. I don't know how many times I have to say it. You could have done something real with your life, something stable. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. It is real, Mom. It's a career. A damn good one, too. You don't understand what goes into it. Ethan snorted, still half focused on his phone. Yeah, real career. Like cooking for people who can't even cook for themselves? He lifted his head, eyes glinting with amusement. Couldn't you have picked something more stable, like accounting or marketing maybe? Something where you're not sweating in a kitchen every day? The jab hit harder than I expected, and I tried to shrug it off, but my hands clenched around my napkin. Stable? Right, because your career is so stable, Ethan. Last time I checked, finance was built on a bunch of people guessing and hoping things go their way. Ethan's smile didn't falter. At least I'm making moves. You can't exactly say that about food. I stared at him, my frustration bubbling over. It's not just about making money, Ethan. It's about passion. Doing something I love and can actually be proud of. You wouldn't get that, though. You're too busy chasing bonuses. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything more. I knew better than to engage him any further. It wouldn't go anywhere. But the anger inside me still churned, heavy and unshakable. Mom, sensing the tension, cut in, her voice casual but sharp. Well, whatever. We'll talk about your passion later, Sam. Right now, we're here to celebrate Ethan's promotion. She glanced at me as if she just remembered I was in the room. Oh, and yours, I guess, if you want to call it that. It's a nice addition to the day. The words felt like a punch in the gut, but I didn't let it show. I leaned back in my chair, looking around the restaurant. The place felt too big for me now, too noisy, too foreign. The whole celebration was a joke. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to spend one more minute pretending to fit in with this family who couldn't see me for what I was. I think I'm going to head out, I said suddenly, standing up. The table went quiet for a second, but no one stopped me. No one seemed to care. What, already? Mom asked, barely glancing up. It's not even that late. I've got plans, I lied. It wasn't like they'd question me. I'll catch up with you guys later. I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't care if they noticed or if they didn't. I grabbed my bag and walked out without a second thought. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, and I stood on the sidewalk, the cool evening air hitting my face. I had hoped, just once, that today would be the day my family saw me, that they'd see how hard I'd worked, how much I'd sacrificed. But instead, I felt like I was being pushed out of my own moment, uninvited to my own celebration, standing there with nothing but the sound of my own breath filling the empty space. I wasn't part of their world, and in that moment, I wasn't even sure I wanted to be. I stepped outside the restaurant, hoping the cold air would clear my head. The weight of the day pressed down on me, and I just wanted to be alone. But as I started to walk down the street, I heard the unmistakable ring of my mom's phone through the restaurant door. Her voice rose, sharp, frantic. Wait, what do you mean it's been denied? She snapped. That's a routine procedure? We paid the premium. You guys are supposed to cover this. I paused, hesitant to eavesdrop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned around and peeked through the window. My family hadn't even noticed I'd left. Ma'am, I'm afraid the claim was rejected due to a coding error, a voice said on the other end of the line. You'll need to get in touch with the hospital's billing department and resubmit the forms. I could hear my mom's breath quicken. I don't have time for this. I'm already struggling to pay bills, and now you're telling me I owe how much? No, this isn't right. I'm not paying that. Her hand shook as she held the phone to her ear, her face pale. I watched her eyes narrow in frustration as the person on the other end explained the next steps. She kept cutting them off, demanding answers that weren't coming. Let me talk to someone else, she said, her voice growing higher. I'll speak to your manager. This is ridiculous. I could hear her growing more and more overwhelmed, her voice breaking with every word. I knew that tone too well, the sound of her being pushed to her breaking point. My dad had stood up at this point, sensing the tension. He walked over, trying to take charge, but I could tell he had no idea how to fix the situation. What's going on, Carol? He asked, glancing at the phone in her hand. What's the problem? It's the damn insurance company, she said, her voice sharp. They're rejecting the claim for my surgery. The amount we owe is... It's over $10,000, Steve. 10,000. We can't afford that. Dad ran his hands through his hair, pacing. Shit. What are we supposed to do? Call the hospital? They said it's the coding error, she replied, her voice rising again. But no one will take responsibility. And we don't even know what to do next. This is a nightmare, Steve. I can't keep dealing with this. The phone call dragged on, each minute building more tension, more hopelessness. I stood frozen outside, watching them, the cold air biting into my skin. It was obvious they had no idea what they were doing. The confusion on their faces, how completely out of their depth they were, was painful to watch. I wasn't sure when it happened, but the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew this. I understood it. I'd dealt with systems like this before. Insurance, regulations, paperwork, food safety codes, compliance forms. It wasn't the same thing, but the process of navigating complex systems, of finding the flaws and fixing them, it was all part of what I did every day. My training in the kitchen had taught me to break things down into parts, to understand how the pieces fit together. This was no different. I'd spent years sifting through complex safety protocols, managing equipment regulations, and dealing with bureaucratic red tape. I knew how to problem solve. I could read a manual and figure out the logic, even if it didn't always make sense, but I also knew my family still saw that as nothing more than just cooking, a career they didn't take seriously. And here I was, watching them scramble, and realizing that despite their mockery, I might be the only person who could fix this. I walked back into the restaurant, still unsure if I should even speak up. But I couldn't just stand there anymore, not when I knew I could help. Mom was still pacing, her eyes frantic. Dad was staring at the phone, trying to figure out what to say. I cleared my throat, and they both looked up at me, surprise flashing across their faces. I can help, I said, my voice steady despite the weight of it all. Mom raised an eyebrow. What? You? Sam, this is an insurance issue. This is way beyond. Actually, I know how to deal with this stuff, I interrupted. I know how to talk to the insurance people, how to look for errors. I've had to do it before, with food safety regulations and compliance stuff. I can help figure it out. Her eyes narrowed, skepticism etched across her face. This is a real problem, Sam, not some kitchen nonsense. But Dad was already looking at me, his expression softening. Wait, you can really help? I nodded. Yeah. Let me make a few calls, see what I can dig up. I know the process. It's not as different from what I do at work as you might think. Mom stayed silent for a moment, the weight of the situation still hanging in the air. Finally, she sighed, clearly defeated. Fine, do whatever you have to do. But this better work, Sam. I'm not dealing with this mess for another day. And just like that, they were relying on me. The same family that had laughed off my career choice, who dismissed me as the non-serious one, was now looking to me for help. It wasn't the kind of victory I'd imagined, but it was something. Something that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I had earned my place, even if they didn't understand it yet. Mom hesitated, her arms crossed tightly in front of her. I could see her battling the skepticism that had always been there, her belief that anything I did in the kitchen wasn't real work, wasn't serious. But the frustration on her face was enough to make her nod reluctantly. Fine. If you think you can help, she muttered, then go ahead. Just don't make this worse. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed the pile of paperwork they'd gathered and sat down at the table, my mind already working. The hospital forms were all over the place, but I could make sense of them. I'd navigated mountains of paperwork in my time: regulations, health codes, compliance audits, all things that had their own complex systems and rules. If I could understand the layers of food safety, insurance coding was just another challenge to break apart. I spread the forms out, my eyes scanning the first set of bills. The more I looked, the clearer it became. There were mistakes, obvious ones, glaring errors in the coding, procedures listed under the wrong categories, charges that didn't align with what was done, duplicated entries. I leaned forward, starting to take notes. This was all about catching patterns, spotting where things didn't match up. Dad walked over and sat next to me, peering over my shoulder. "What are you seeing?" he asked, his tone cautious. I pointed to a series of charges. "This one here. It's listed under urgent care, but the procedure was routine. It should have been coded differently, which is why the claim was rejected." I moved my finger along the paper. "And here, this one's duplicated. They charged twice for the same service." Dad blinked, clearly not expecting it. "Wait, really? They double charged?" "Yeah," I said. "And they did it with multiple procedures. It's pretty sloppy, actually. They're hoping people don't notice." He let out a low whistle. "I didn't even know how to look at this. You're good at this." My jaw tightened slightly, but I kept my focus on the papers. The last thing I wanted was for Dad to get all sentimental about my career. Not now, not after everything. Mom was still hovering, watching me from the kitchen. She wasn't saying anything, but I could see the shift in her eyes, just a tiny flicker of realization. I wasn't just guessing or fumbling through this. I knew what I was doing. I worked through the paperwork for hours, piecing together the evidence, writing down every error I found. The insurance terms were complex, but once I had a few key pieces, it started to make sense. Every form, every charge, every misstep, they were all part of the system I knew how to untangle. It wasn't just about cooking, it was about organizing, analyzing, understanding how systems worked. That was what I'd done for years in kitchens, figuring out how to keep everything running, how to spot a flaw and correct it before it became a bigger problem. It was the same here. I could feel Dad watching me, still sitting next to me at the table. It wasn't lost on me that he'd never really seen me work like this. He'd never seen me solve problems, deal with complexity the way I had to in my career. And now, for the first time, he was watching me do it, and he wasn't dismissing it. "Sam," he said slowly, his voice lower than usual, "I've got to admit, I never realized how much I don't know, how much you understood about all this. I always thought you just cooked." His gaze softened. "I didn't know you could work with something like this, too." I didn't know how to respond. There was a part of me that wanted to brush it off, to say something sarcastic, but instead, I just nodded, keeping my eyes on the paperwork. "Yeah, well," I said, my voice quieter than I'd intended. "I've been doing it for years, just not in the way you think." Mom walked over then, looking at the mess of papers in front of me. She hesitated, her mouth pressed into a thin line. This might actually work, huh?" She looked from the paperwork to me, then to Dad. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "It will. I'll get the hospital to resubmit the claim. We'll fix it." For the first time today, I saw something flicker across Mom's face. It was fleeting, but it was there. A crack in the armor. A recognition, however small, that maybe, just maybe, I knew more than she gave me credit for. I spent another hour meticulously going through the forms, writing down everything I needed. By the time I was done, I had a solid case ready to present to the hospital's billing department. It was a technical fix, yes, but the work I'd done was the same kind of work I'd put into becoming a chef. Attention to detail, precision, and patience. "I'm going to call tomorrow," I said, sitting back in my chair. "It'll get sorted." Mom looked at me for a long moment, her arms finally uncrossing. "Okay, thanks, Sam. I don't know how to say it, but thanks." I nodded, standing up. "No problem." I could feel the weight of the moment. They didn't fully understand everything I did, but they were starting to see that the skills I'd honed over years in kitchens weren't just about cooking. They were about thinking, solving problems, navigating systems, making something out of chaos. For once, it felt like they might actually be starting to get it. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I had to call the insurance company over and over again, sometimes waiting on hold for hours, sometimes dealing with representatives who barely knew their own policies. It felt like I was getting passed around from one department to the next, each person giving me conflicting information, telling me to call someone else. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stick with it. There was no one else who was going to do this. Mom started to get more involved, pacing the house while I spent hours on the phone. She'd ask for updates, and I'd try to explain what I'd done, where I was in the process. But it wasn't like she understood the ins and outs of insurance coding or the legalities of claims. She didn't know the difference between an error in billing and a mistake in how something was classified. I don't get why it's taking so long, she said one evening, pacing as I waited on another call. Can't they just fix it? Why does it have to be so complicated? I wanted to explain. I really did. But it wasn't about fixing it. It was about digging through the mess of codes, understanding where the system had failed, finding that one tiny mistake in an ocean of paperwork. I didn't think I could make her see that, though. Instead, I just said, it's complicated because they don't want to admit they messed up, but I'll figure it out. She didn't seem convinced, but she backed off, at least for the moment. The worst part of it all was that they still didn't quite get it. My family had started relying on me, but they still didn't see the intricacies of what I was doing. To them, it was just paperwork. Just another thing to deal with and move on from. But for me, this wasn't just about fixing a mistake. It was about proving something to them, to myself. I was fighting for something bigger than a bill. I was fighting to be seen, to show them that I wasn't just some kid who chose a lesser career, that the skills I'd honed in the kitchen, those same skills that had always been dismissed, were worth something. Ethan had stayed quiet through most of this process, but over time, I noticed his attitude slowly shifting. At first, he'd made snide remarks here and there, like, maybe you'll get it fixed, but how long is it going to take? It's just paperwork, right? But then one day, after I'd spent hours on the phone with a representative who had been particularly unhelpful, Ethan spoke up. Damn, Sam, he said, tossing a glance over at me as I slammed down the phone in frustration. I don't know how you do it. You've been at this for weeks, and you're still not losing your mind. I looked at him, not expecting anything like this. What do you mean? I mean, I would have given up a long time ago, he said, his voice a little softer than usual. I can barely deal with one call to my bank when they screw something up, but you're fighting with these people for days. You're persistent. I didn't know how to respond to that. Ethan, of all people, acknowledging that I was doing something worthwhile, it felt strange. But it was the kind of acknowledgement I hadn't gotten from anyone before. Yeah, well, I said, shrugging, I'm not going to stop until this gets fixed. And that's when I finally got the breakthrough. It had been nearly a month of back and forth, dozens of calls, dozens of hours spent sifting through paperwork and insurance jargon. But finally, after another call to the hospital's billing department, I caught a mistake that had slipped through the cracks. They'd misclassified one of Mom's procedures entirely, and as a result, they'd charged for a higher cost service that hadn't even been performed. I felt the blood rush to my face as I reviewed the documents. It was the break I needed. I got the billing department to reprocess the claim with the corrected classification, and they agreed to resubmit it. When they called me back a few days later to confirm, I nearly couldn't believe it. The total medical bill, which had originally been over $10,000, was now reduced by more than half. The relief hit me like a tidal wave. I was exhausted. The tension of those weeks, the endless hours spent on the phone, it all melted away in an instant. And in that moment, as I sat there holding the phone, listening to the representative confirm the new amount, I realized something. I had done it. I'd navigated that system, just like I'd navigated every other complex system I'd encountered in my life. I had earned my place in this in a way I hadn't been able to do with my career before. Mom walked in just as I hung up. I looked up at her, and without saying anything, I handed her the phone. They fixed it, I said, my voice low. The bill's been reduced. Her eyes widened, then flickered over to Dad, who was standing in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just gave me that look, one that was half surprised, half impressed. I had never seen that look before, and it made everything I'd been through worth it. Mom exhaled sharply, her face softening. You really did it. You saved us a ton of money. I nodded, but there was something else there. For the first time, my family was seeing me, not just as a chef, but as someone who could handle these kinds of things. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about everything I had to offer. Yeah, I said quietly. I did. The phone call ended, and I set it down, feeling a rush of relief flood through me. I had done it. After weeks of fighting, hours on the phone, digging through documents, catching mistakes, and correcting them, I had saved my family tens of thousands of dollars. The bill was slashed in half, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had won. Mom sat down next to me, staring at the phone, then at the papers I'd spread out across the table. Her lips trembled slightly, and I watched as she swallowed hard. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little, but it didn't go away. I could see the weight of everything lift from her face, replaced by something else, a kind of quiet awe. You really did it, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Her eyes glistened as she looked up at me. You saved us. You saved us from losing everything. I didn't know what to say. All the anger I had felt, all the hurt, seemed to dissipate in that moment. I just nodded, letting the quiet sink in. Dad walked over and stood in the doorway, his hands stuffed into his pockets. There was no smile, but there was something else in his eyes. Something that hadn't been there before. I could tell he was thinking, really thinking, about everything that had happened. Finally, he spoke. I'm not gonna lie, Sam, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I never thought much of your career. I thought it was just about cooking, just about food. He paused for a moment, looking at the floor, then back at me. But now, I see. I see how much work you put into everything. I didn't realize how deep your knowledge goes, how much you understand about these systems, about solving problems. It's more than just food. It's real work. You did something real for us. I stood there, stunned, trying to process his words. My dad, who had never understood, who had always made it clear that my career was just a stepping stone to something more respectable, was finally seeing me. Seeing my worth, not just as a chef, but as a person who had spent years mastering something complex, something technical, something valuable. I swallowed, trying to keep the emotion in check. Thanks, Dad. Mom, still quiet beside me, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She didn't say anything more, but the look on her face was enough. It was as if, for the first time, she finally realized that what I did wasn't a waste, that I wasn't wasting my time, that I had earned my place. Then Ethan, who had been hanging back, suddenly spoke up. He hadn't said much through this entire process, just silently watching from the sidelines. But now, he stepped forward, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking a little less sure of himself. You know, he said, his voice somewhat tentative, I've been kind of a jerk about all this. I've always thought my job was the real thing. I mean, finance, right? But what you did, what you've been doing, it's more important than anything I've done. He let out a small, awkward laugh, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since all this started. I don't know how you managed to stay on top of it. You're way more persistent than I ever would be. And you got it done. So, yeah, you're a hell of a lot more capable than I gave you credit for. I didn't know what to say to that. Ethan, admitting he was wrong? That was something new. I just nodded, letting the words settle in. Thanks, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but steady. For a long moment, no one spoke. We just stood there, letting everything hang in the air. I could feel the weight of the past few weeks, of everything I'd been fighting for, settling into a place where it finally felt right, where I finally felt seen. Not for the chef I was supposed to be, but for the person I become, the person who had solved the problem, who had fought through the bureaucracy and the red tape, and who had won. It was more than a breakthrough with the insurance company. It was a breakthrough with my family. Sam, Dad said, breaking the silence again, you've earned more respect than I gave you credit for. He nodded slowly, like he was still processing everything, but his words were genuine. You've done something here that I can't even begin to wrap my head around. I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've done, but for how you did it. I wanted to say something, to throw out some sarcastic response or make a joke, but I couldn't. Not now. Instead, I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. For the first time, I felt like they saw me, not just as the cook or the daughter they couldn't understand, but as someone who had earned her place, someone who mattered. And that was more than enough. A few days later, we gathered for dinner, but this time it felt different. Mom had made a point to make it special, something beyond just a quick meal to mark the occasion. She reserved a table at one of my favorite local spots, a place where I had always imagined going out to eat on some real celebration day, the kind of place that had the fancy menu with wine pairings and dishes I'd only made in school. It felt almost surreal to be here with my family, celebrating my success. As we sat down, I could feel the change in the air. It wasn't just about the food. It wasn't even about the money we'd saved. It was about something bigger, something I hadn't expected to come from any of this. Here's to Sam, Dad said, raising his glass. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. You've done something real. You've worked hard, and we see that now. We're proud of you, kid. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words until I heard them. They hit harder than anything I'd been waiting for all these years. I took a breath, trying not to get choked up. Mom nodded, her hand resting on the table. I'll be honest, Sam. I never understood what you were doing. I always thought you were just chasing a pipe dream, and I didn't support you the way I should have. But now I get it. I'm proud of you too. Her words were quiet, but they had weight. I knew she'd meant every one of them. I had never been able to shake the feeling that she saw my career as a waste, as something beneath her expectations for me. But now, in this moment, I knew things were different. Ethan raised his glass too, his expression more serious than usual. I gotta admit, he said, his voice surprisingly sincere. I used to think what you did was, well, not important. But now? Now I see it's more than just food. You make a difference, Sam. You really do. I wish I could do something that actually matters to people the way you do. I hadn't expected that from him. Ethan, always the one to brush me off, to look down on what I did. But there he was, genuinely admitting that my work meant more than just a job. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a wave of something new. Respect, maybe, or even gratitude. Thanks, Ethan, I said, feeling the weight of his words sink in. As the night went on, the conversation turned into laughter. We talked about everything and nothing, and I realized how much I had missed this, the way things felt normal again. But this time, it was different. For the first time, I felt connected. Not just because we were family, but because for once, they understood me. They respected me, not just for my degree, but for everything I had put into getting there, everything I had worked through. And somewhere in all that, I realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore, not in the way I once had. I didn't need to prove my worth to them. I had done it. I had earned my place, not just as their daughter, but as a person who had worked hard for everything she had. I didn't need their validation anymore because I had validated myself. And that felt like the real victory.